If statements allow you, as the programmer, to write code that is only executed under a certain condition. For example, I may be writing a program to scale grades. There are many ways to scale grades, but in this example, I want to be able to add a certain number of marks to each grade. An if statement may contain multiple clauses. We'll start with an example that has one clause, and then build the example up to include additional clauses. Each clause in an if statement has a condition and a body. An if statement always starts with an if clause, which contains the keyword if, the condition, and the body of the if clause. The condition must evaluate to true or false, or in other words, it must evaluate to a Boolean value. In this example, we have a variable named scale that holds a Boolean value, and we're going to use it as the condition. If scale is true, the line in the body of the if clause will be executed, and we'll add the scale by factor to the grade. If scale is not true, the line in the body of the if clause will not be executed. Now let's move on to an example that has more than one clause. Every if statement must start with an if clause, and may optionally have elif or else clauses. Let's look at those clauses in more detail in the context of an example. The first thing that Python does when evaluating an if statement is check if there is an else clause. If there is, Python replaces the else clause with an elif true clause. In this example, there is an else clause, so let's do that replacement now in comments as a reminder that Python will treat the else clause as an elif true clause. As in the previous example, the condition in the if clause is evaluated first. If it evaluates to true, the body of the if clause is executed, and the execution of the if statement ends. All the other clauses are ignored. Since this condition is true, and the grade would be greater than the max grade if it was increased by scale by, when this code is run, the condition in the if clause will evaluate to true, the grade will be set to max grade, and the if statement will end execution. We can see that the grade is now 100, or max grade. If I change the initial value of grade, the condition in the if clause will no longer evaluate to true. In this case, the statement inside the if clause's body is not executed, and we move on to evaluate the condition in the next clause. Remember that Python is treating this else clause as an elif true clause, so we know that the condition is true. The line of code in the body of this clause is now executed, and then the execution of the if statement ends. We can see that the grade has been increased by 5. Let's look at a third example. In this example, we have an if clause and an elif clause. Our if clause checks to see if the scaled grade would be greater than the max grade, and if so, it just sets the grade to be max grade. Our elif clause checks to make sure the grade is greater than 0, perhaps so that people who miss the exam or assignment are not assigned a grade. Let's think about how this code is executed. Grade equals 78. So first, when we execute the condition of the if clause, we expect it to evaluate to false. If we add 5 to 78, that is not greater than the max grade, so execution moves to the next clause. The elif condition is checked. Is the grade of 78 greater than 0? And that evaluates to true. So then the line of code in the body of the elif clause is executed, and the execution of the if statement ends. Let's run the code and see if we get the value that we expect, which is 83. Now if I change the value of grade and set it to be 0, we expect different behavior. So again, the first clause that would be executed would be the if clause. The condition would be evaluated, and it evaluates to false. 0 plus 5 is not greater than 100. So then the condition of the elif clause is executed. In this case, the grade is not greater than 0, so the body of the elif clause is not executed, and the execution of the if statement ends. So in this case, when I run the code, I expect that the grade will still be 0, and we see that that is the case. As we went through each of the different examples, only one clause's body was ever executed. That is because the elif stands for else if, and each subsequent elif clause is only evaluated if no previous clause's condition evaluated to true. As soon as one of the clause's conditions evaluates to true, that clause's body is executed and execution of the if statement finishes.